Okay, well, I have 11:30. So good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Today, we're starting a conversation about how to ensure that every member of the Yolo County community has access to effective broadband internet. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping announcements. This webinar is being recorded. Excuse me. All participants are muted and video is turned off. But this is a conversation. We do want to hear your questions. If you have questions to ask, please enter your question in the Q&A box. If you have any technical issues like trouble hearing a panelist, then please use the chat function. I'm Dr. Larry Ozarian with the Woodland Technology Alliance. I'm a health technology strategist supporting healthcare entities, government agencies, and startup companies with strategy, policy, and innovation. The Woodland Technology Alliance is focused on growing and supporting the technology community in Woodland. And we're fortunate to be joined in this conversation by our partner, Valley Vision, a very well-established, very effective convener in our Sacramento region, who has a long history of participating in the community broadband discussion. I'd like to start our conversation today with David Espinoza, a broadband project leader for Valley Vision. David, could you please tell us a little about yourself and Valley Vision's involvement in broadband?
Yes, thank you, Larry. I am David Espinoza, project leader of innovation and infrastructure at Valley Vision. I'm leading person from the Connected Capital Area Broadband Consortium. My background is in electrical engineering and telecommunication research, specialized in conducting multidisciplinary analysis to expand broadband internet services with emphasis to unserved and underserved areas. This interdisciplinary analysis includes technology, economics, business, policy, and regulation. I've been working on reducing the digital divide for nearly 17 years, working in projects from designing and installing wireless telehealth networks in very rural, remote areas in the Amazon rainforest, to supporting internet service providers and local governments to expand broadband infrastructure in the California Northeast. On the role of Valley Vision in broadband, Valley Vision has been the leading organization of the Connected Capital Area Broadband Consortium since 2012. This broadband consortium supports the counties of Sacramento, Sutter, Yolo, and Yuba to achieve the California goal of 98% broadband service availability to households. Valley Vision's work in the broadband consortium includes supporting ISPs and other eligible entities to submit project applications to the California Advanced Services Fund, more specifically to the broadband infrastructure grants. Valley Vision also provides model policies, ordinances, permitting, and planning guidelines for local governments to expedite infrastructure projects and reduce deployment barriers. We have also been improving mapping and data to assess broadband access and adoption gaps, and identify priority areas for broadband expansion or upgrades. For this purpose, we use CPUC broadband availability and adoption data. Valley Vision has also been supporting the CPUC to conduct validation of broadband coverage and speeds using tools developed by the CPUC, such as the CalSpeed app. Valley Vision has also been working with state agencies and organizations to expand broadband in the region, including partners and collaborative work with the California Emerging Technology Fund, California Forward, the Department of Technology, Department of Transportation, the Association of Councils of Governments, among other local and regional partners. Other Valley Vision's broadband projects include the 21st Century Workforce, which is focused on assessing needs of industry clusters, such as information and communication technologies, and is also working with a wide range of workforce development partners, including 3 community college districts. Another project is the AgTech pilot in Yolo County in partnership with CETF. This project documented the need for and benefits of reliable, cost-effective broadband access in rural areas for agriculture. The findings of this project help to improve connectivity for rural areas and to accelerate AgTech adoption to support the food and ag economy. Other partners in this project included UC Davis, Chico State, and Fresno State. Valivision has also been leading the Sacramento Coalition for Digital Inclusion in partnership with the Sacramento Public Library, City of Sacramento, and Social Venture Partners of Sacramento. This coalition focuses on specific outcomes that target identified community needs and create meaningful technology opportunities for individuals. Strategies for this coalition include improving access to internet service, computing devices, and digital skills. And Valivision has also been managing the regional prosperity strategy, which is a strategic framework and bridge to action for the 6-county Sacramento region that prioritizes core economic initiatives and will result in a more prosperous, equitable, and resilient region. And that's, I think, an overview of Valivision's role in the regional broadband initiatives.
Great, thank you.
Other project trees that I might have been missing?
No, that's great. Thank you, David.
Yes, thank you, David. Next, excuse me. Next, we have Tara Thronson, Deputy to Supervisor Saylor in Yolo County District 2. Tara, please tell us a little about yourself and the supervisor's involvement in broadband.
Yes. Good morning. Thank you for having me today. It's a pleasure to join you all. So as Larry said, I'm Tara Thronson, Deputy to Yolo County Supervisor Don Saylor, and I also serve on the Yolo County Broadband Task Force. Supervisor Saylor's district includes Central and Western, Davis, UC Davis, the City of Winters, and the ag land in between. Prior to joining Supervisor Saylor's office, I worked for Valley Vision for 6 years and helped launch the Connected Capital Area Broadband Consortia and other work related to closing the digital divide in our region and amplifying and elevating that, that important message and cause. So it's interesting how it's all come full circle and connected back to Yolo County. And during my time with Valley Vision, we partnered with some leaders in Yolo County as they were initiating a broadband strategic plan. So when I came over to Yolo County, that's why I started serving on the broadband task force. And I know some other regions are looking at doing a broadband strategic plan as well, but I just wanted to share a quick summary because I think that plan from 2015 kind of set the county as a whole in a new direction in elevating that work. In that the strategic plan raised awareness of the importance of broadband in the region or in the county, identified gaps in service, both in the urban and the rural settings. It really served as kind of a baseline for us of where we were at, and helped create a roadmap of priority areas in the unincorporated areas. And even though it's 5 years later, we still reference it. In fact, earlier this year, I said, where's that list? And we need to update it of who's still left. And it's great to see some of the communities are served now, but there's still others that we continue to chip away at and trying to address their connectivity issues. I wanted to also share a little bit about the Yolo County Broadband Task Force. I thought this was a really innovative strategy that the county put together after the Board of Supervisors adopted the Broadband Strategic Plan. They brought multiple departments together, so including the library, and I see the Yolo County librarian is on the call. The head of IT is on this task force, community services, so when we're looking at any road projects, is there any opportunities for joint use? The Yolo County LAFCO Executive Director, who I think is also joining us today, is kind of helped lead us, the CAO's office. And so just bringing all these different entities together, so as we start looking at how do we tackle some communities, kind of brainstorming and looking at different angles. So one of the first communities that the task force looked at was the community of Knights Landing in northern Yolo County. And many of you are familiar with it, but it's a smaller community. 23% are below the poverty level at the time, 14% unemployment, 91% free reduced school meals. So a real need. And we also had an asset. We had a library with a gig of service to that library. And students would sit outside doing their homework, but we wanted to bring it more to the community. And at the time, some residents were unserved, and some were using fixed wireless with limited DSL, maximum speeds about 3.5 megabits down. So this broadband task force sought grant opportunities, worked with providers, kept hitting barrier after barrier and kept turning stones. And then finally, a provider, Wave Broadband, who served the backhaul to the library, ended up bringing fiber to the home to 265 homes, building off their existing infrastructure. And on top of that, they also are offering their reduced rates for lower income families that have children in the free reduced lunch program. So that was many years, but an early win. And I have other stories of some success stories that have creative solutions from different providers in this region that I can share later. But I just wanted to close my opening with giving a little bit of context. So, because I know there's some people on this call that aren't from Yolo County. Yolo County is home to 220,000 residents, and 87% of those residents live within the urban centers. And that's by design to protect our ag land. And then also 20% of our population lives below the poverty level. So those that live in the rural areas typically don't have the density for traditional financial models that make infrastructure deployment pencil out. And we found this challenge even for communities that have some density of 30, 50, or even 100 households in an area. And those communities can be even just a half mile or 1 mile away from the city limits, yet the math just doesn't work for some of the traditional providers. And we're finding that this doesn't just have an impact on the ability for children to do homework or now schooling, full-time schooling from home, but it also impacts our ag industry. And there are some incredible advances in precision farming, but farmers are limited in their ability to implement ag tech due to the lack of internet access. So much so that through the leadership of Trish and Valley Vision and many others, we brought out the Federal Communications Commission Chairman, Chair Pai, out last spring and took him to some of these farms to show him that just 10 miles away from downtown Woodland, you can have hardly any connectivity. And in other areas, you can have one field where you can have water sensors and another field you can't because you can't connect that data. So in summary, I think we're all here because we understand the issue, but we struggle with connectivity to infrastructure and frankly, affordable rates. They're both a significant challenge in both the rural and urban settings. And I look forward to the rest of the conversation today.
Yeah, thank you for painting that picture for us, Tara. I think that it's really helpful foundation for us to build on, and I think we'll explore some of the topics that you raised a little bit later. Next, we have Karen Bain, a member of the Board of Trustees of the Woodland Joint Unified School District. Karen, can you please tell us a little about yourself and the school district's involvement in broadband?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Larry. Hi, everyone. I want to thank Valley Vision and the Woodland Technology Alliance for the invitation to participate as a panelist in today's webinar. My name is Karen Bain, and I'm a board member with Woodland Joint Unified School District. During the day, I'm a college admissions counselor in private practice. I was also a school counselor for many years. This is my 4th year as a board member with Woodland Joint Unified. Woodland Joint Unified School District spans more than 300 miles. The city of Woodland, the communities of Yolo, Knights Landing, and Zamora, and large rural areas outside of Woodland. We have 10,200 students from preschool to grade 12 and an adult education program as well. Demographically, our district is 70% Latino, 20% white, and 10% Asian, mostly Punjabi. More than 65% of the students qualify for free and reduced meals, and more than 85% of those qualify for free meals. Although this webinar is about broadband in Yolo County, and there are 5 school districts within Yolo County, my answers will be specific to the experience of Woodland Joint Unified, as that's what I know best. So I was never a techie. I still would not call myself a techie, though this is the 2nd time in 2 months that I have been a panelist on a webinar about broadband. I became interested in this topic because I see it as an equity issue. And I have been a passionate advocate for educational equity and really all kinds of equity since I was very young. Woodland Joint Unified has long seen the technological divide as an equity issue as well, and has taken some specific steps to close that divide. Woodland Joint Unified began to invest in classroom technology more than 20 years ago and has progressed to our current status as a one-to-one district. The journey to becoming a one-to-one district started with teacher concerns. Teachers could tell which students had a computer at home and which ones did not. Essentially, teachers could describe a student's family income based upon that student's comfort level using technology. An awkward place to be in a country which believes that education should level the playing field. So Woodland Joint Unified began to bridge the digital divide. At first, the district thought if every student had access to a computer lab on campus, this would bridge the digital divide, but it didn't. Some elementary schools started purchasing classroom tablets for student use. Then students could use the computers every day. Teachers taught students skills and knowledge regarding computer applications and use. But even after all that, teachers could still tell the family income of their students based on how the students used the computers. About 10 years ago, it became clear to the district that nothing other than one-to-one technology would do. And perhaps even more importantly, in order to fully bridge the digital divide, students needed to be able to use laptops at school and at home. A committee spent a couple of years testing various laptop models. A primary concern was durability, so the committee had real students haul various models around in their backpacks to find out which ones really held up. As a result of this test, the district decided to purchase Chromebooks because they survived. Over the last 7 years, Woodland has purchased 1 or 2 grade levels of Chromebooks every year using their LCAP funds. This year, 2019 to 2020, was the first year that all students in our district, grades K through 12, had their own Chromebook. Students in grade 4 and up can take the Chromebooks home every night. Students in grade 7 are issued 1 Chromebook, which they turn in when they graduate from high school. We just purchased Chromebooks for our preschool students. However, we found that many students did not have Wi-Fi at home. So 3 years ago, we began offering a hotspot to any student who qualified for free and reduced lunch. The hotspot is attached to the Chromebook. Though it's cheaper to have 1 hotspot per family, we issue 1 hotspot per Chromebook. Because a family with multiple children, 1 hotspot is not really strong enough to support multiple Chromebooks. Unbeknownst to us, being a one-to-one Chromebook district set us up reasonably well when we had to shut down due to COVID-19 on March 13th. And there'll be more about that in the rest of my presentation, but I'm happy to turn it back to you, Larry. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Karen. Next, we have Samantha Samuelson, a legislative aide for Assemblymember Cecilia Aguirre-Curry at the California State Assembly. Sam, could you please tell us a little about yourself and the Assembly members' involvement in broadband?
Sure, and thank you so much for having me. I do have a little bit of construction going on at my house right now, so there's a little bit of background noise, so let me know if that becomes an issue.
Right now,
but nice to be here with all of you today. So the Assembly member has been working on broadband issues for quite some time now. I mean, she had worked on connectivity when she was mayor of Winters and during her time in the legislature, and was really a pivotal part of AB 1665, which was passed in 2017, that, you know, she wanted to be sure that we were not only providing options for connectivity in rural communities, but really in her district as a whole. So her advocacy has remained strong and true during her time in the Assembly, and hasn't faltered, especially in light of COVID. She recently introduced Assembly Bill 570, which deals with the same program that Assembly Bill 1665 had dealt with back in 2017. But she saw that there really wasn't much action on the ground as far as these incumbent providers and internet service providers who said that they would step up, actually stepping up to bridge the digital divide in communities like those in Assembly District 4 and in Yolo County and throughout our state in both urban and rural areas. And so the bill that we've been working on and that she's been really, aggressively fighting for throughout this really sort of wonky legislative session that we have going on this year is aimed to hold folks accountable and to ensure that we're really building out thoughtfully to whole communities, but focusing state dollars in areas that just have not seen enough funding or investment in far too long. And so I can leave it there and definitely go into greater detail, but Valley Vision has been incredibly helpful and informative, and both Trish and David and your whole team have been so really just very much a part of the fact that we got AB 570 to where it is now and passed out of Senate Energy Committee. So I just wanted to leave that with just a thank you to all of you to start the conversation, but wonderful to be with you all here today.
Thank you, Sam, and I will echo that. Thank you all for participating today. This is a conversation to discuss three kind of broad topics. What is the state of broadband in our community? What is missing or needed? And what opportunities should we explore in order to try and fill those needs? So because this is intended to be a conversation, I want to start with the first audience question. And Tara, I think it was directed to you. Where did it go? Can you share any details of the community outreach process strategies to assess and determine community needs?
Well, community needs. So I'll say we start with looking at the broadband strategic plan. And again, that's 5 years old, but hopefully things haven't gotten worse. It's just kind of our baseline we built on. And so because that was a significant effort done by our, by the contractor, our partner, who went out and did a lot of outreach on the ground. Then we do reference the CPUC maps. Oftentimes they're not quite accurate, but really it comes down to ground truth testing, and community members come to us. I can tell you 3 neighborhoods in our community that have reached out to us over the years, 2 of which, one has a solution, one's in process with a very creative provider that I think is on the line right now as well. And then the other is still looking for options that meet both their speed and cost price point needs. But then, like, honestly, yesterday I got an email from a constituent calling on behalf of someone that doesn't live in our district saying, hey, can you help us find out options? And so I have a call into that person to find out, where do you live? And let's talk scenarios. And it was about school stuff. And I think they're in Woodland Joint Unified. So I'm glad that Karen just gave me some of the answers right now. But a lot of it's ground truth testing, and we've had folks call neighborhoods that say, hey, we just saw AT&T pull a business line right by our house. Why can't they come to us? And then you call up AT&T and say, why can't you serve them? And there's a reason, but it's not a reason that the residents like. So to the answer of how do you assess the availability, it's not super scientific, but it's a mix of just frankly staying in touch with your community and at the ground level. And we're hearing it more and more these days as the reality of the digital divide is really impacting us severely. And it's not just, do I have any connectivity? When you're trying to do a meeting like this, while your kids are also doing a meeting like this, like that's not 3 megabits down. That's like, you need some significant speeds and bandwidth to really be able to work and school from home in different scenarios.
Thank you, Tara. I'd like to move to David. David, can you talk a little bit about the state of broadband in Yolo County and any regional coalitions that exist to promote equity in broadband? And there you go.
Sure, Larry. Based on latest CPUC broadband availability data and reports, which is generated by self-reporting data and information provided by ISPs in an annual basis, Yolo County is at around 96% broadband service availability based on the California standard of 6 megabit downstream, 1 megabit upstream. That is from a total of 73,648 households. Around 70,859 are served at this speed, but still around 2,789 households have internet service below this speed or having not internet service at all. If we would be able to see this coverage in a map, like for example, in the California Interactive Broadband Map, we would see that most of the served areas are in cities, towns. Those are the ones that show us served. But as Tara mentioned, sometimes local governments, residents, or even other ISPs have a different perception of which areas have been served. Regarding broadband adoption or subscribership, they're using, again, CPUC broadband data. There are 57,545 consumer connections at the speeds at least 6 megabits, 1 megabit up, which turns to be around 81% of all the households, which has subscriberships to internet service at this speed. Again, if we would see that in a map, we would see that the west part of the county, including Ginda, Esparto, Madison, and Winters, shows adoption levels from 60 to 80%. And the north part of the county, including Dunnigan, Yolo, and Knights Landing, has adoption or subscribership levels from 40 to 60%. And the central part of the county, including Monument Hills, Woodland, and Davis, shows more than 80%, and with some small pockets in Woodland, which adoption levels from 40 to 60%. In the southeast part of the county, West Sacramento and Clarksburg, there are adoption levels from 60 to 80%. Regarding regional coalitions, we have the Connected Capital Area Broadband Consortium members, which include internet service providers, local governments, community-based organizations, community anchor institutions in the fields of healthcare, education, emergency response. We have also business organizations and technology groups. Main focus of the consortium work is on expanding broadband availability and access to households, but also aggregating demand from other potential stakeholders, such as community anchor institutions, businesses, and industrial customers. There is also the Sacramento Coalition for Digital Inclusion, which, as mentioned before worked with the Sacramento Public Library, City of Sacramento, and Social Venture Partners of Sacramento. They're focusing also in improving access to internet service, computing devices, and digital skills.
So David, let me ask you a clarifying question, excuse me, because I heard you start by saying that, you know, there was 96% availability throughout the county, and yet after that, I heard you talk about 60 to 80% penetration. Do we think that there are key root causes to why we're not achieving the theoretical potential? Is this a cost issue? One of the things that came up was, a question that came up was talking about migrant families and the ability of them to gain access. Do we have some thoughts about how that is? And then I kind of want to bring in all the other panelists to kind of weigh in on their thoughts on the data that David presented. So David, if you want to go first.
I think I can write some initial overview. I have just started working with Valley Vision and the Capital Connected Area Consortium the last few weeks, but I think always pricing is an issue from the service. And I think that Trish or Tara can provide some more specific cases and why it might be the cases that adoption levels are much lower than the availability or access.
Tara, do you want to weigh in?
I would affirm that pricing is a challenge. So I'll just give you a few examples. So Knights Landing, which is very low income, if they can get the $9.95, or any community that has the option for the low cost internet option, like Comcast, AT&T, Wave, they all offer it around $10 a month if you have a child on free or reduced lunch program. But then we have other communities where it's folks on fixed incomes. And so like one neighborhood, they just upgraded their access and someone's paying $144 a month for 75 megabits down, and he's in heaven and thinks it's a dream. But another community there, that's a non-starter for them. I mean, that's just not a feasible part of their budget. So I do think, and often I think also there's other folks that are accessing internet through the library. That's another thing we discovered during the shelter in place. We had someone in one of these unserved community areas call me and say, how am I supposed to check my email when I can't go to the library, or I can't go to the senior center and get my free Wi-Fi? Like, that's what they were dependent on. So I do think cost is a main piece. And I think more and more people are understanding the value. So that used to be our issue of people not seeing why they needed it. But we live in such a digital economy in a world now, I think people get the value. It's just the cost.
I will say, this is Trish, I will say also that we have found that it's not easy sometimes to sign up for the low cost programs. And I think that's where having a community technology partner that can help with outreach and helping people get through the process would be really valuable. I think the Yolo Broadband strategic plan too showed challenges with reliability of internet, high cost, sometimes slow speeds. And this isn't just for households, this is for businesses and other partners as well. So Larry, to your point also, and as described, we have many families that just even $10 a month is a stretch. So how can we make ubiquitous broadband be equitable and accessible for everyone is one of our key challenges.
And I think that we'll know when we're at full penetration when we have 96% of people having access to the 96% that's available. So clearly, as long as those numbers are different, there's a problem. Sam, did you want to weigh in? Any thoughts?
You know, my boss has been concerned about some of the affordability questions that have been raised, not only at the Digital Divide task force meetings that have been convened by the superintendent, but just in conversations about expanding broadband access this year. And what we've also been hearing is that oftentimes these providers will advertise their affordable plans, you know, work with the family and say, okay, you're eligible, come in to install hardware, or, you know, help get them set up, and then all of a sudden you're ineligible, and sort of doing this bait and switch. And so simply requiring them to offer the affordable plans is one thing, but actually seeing them sell these plans and ensure that if you're eligible, you remain eligible and that funding isn't cut off, or you're not having to, you know, close an account and begin a new one, which are all these, you know, different barriers that we're seeing pop up, especially during COVID, is definitely at the forefront of my boss's mind. And we're trying to sort of address at least some of those concerns by working with the PUC to help partner with some of those providers who are in fact offering affordable plans and can show us who is adopting these affordable plans. And Valley Vision has been very vocal advocate in saying that we need to have some form of accountability, and that we can't simply say that you have to have it as an option, you need to actually be executing.
And one of the questions that came up from the audience was about giving access to, or making access available for migrants who are undocumented. Do you, Sam, specifically know whether there are vendors that are willing to work with undocumented workers, or is that still a challenge?
You know, one of the recent Digital Divide Task Force hearings, some of the providers, and I don't want to list off any names because I haven't verified this information myself, but they had made clear that they were not trying to stick with some of the existing requirements or previous requirements of having to offer your social security number or different information that they use to identify a customer. That could potentially be a barrier, or really just, you know, something that incites fear in folks who have reason to be fearful of providing information to an unknown source or someone they can't trust. And it's definitely been brought up. I really can't say that I've heard anything on the ground that reflects that being brought into practice.
So from your perspective, it's still a challenge.
Yeah, and part of my boss's Assembly Bill 570 that she's running this year is the Department of Education has been working on compiling information from their school districts, from students and the LEAs that are offering sort of stats on who has connectivity at home or who has a device or who needs a device. And so we codify that language, and it's voluntary for our local governments and local education agencies to provide this information to CDE so that we're able to sort of get a better picture of, you know, there may be multiple children living in a household, and like Tara was saying earlier, you may not have enough bandwidth and you may have connectivity, but it simply isn't enough to have parents who are working from home and multiple children who are accessing distance learning software. So there is a recognition that we just don't have a full picture of who is in need and what those needs really look like.
Yeah. Karen, I did want to kind of close this part of the section out with you really quickly. The school district sounds like they're in a unique position where it sounds like you have 100% of your participants with access. Is that accurate? And if so, where do you go from here?
Well, so we need to really look at the definitions when we talk about access. Do 100% of our students have a Chromebook? Yes, that is true. I wanted to talk a little bit about the issue of undocumented persons, undocumented families, because that is an issue for us. And one of the things that we're seeing as the school district is that because of the fear, which has really generated because of the federal government, and the free and reduced lunch program is a federal program. Although undocumented persons are not supposed to be penalized for signing their families up for that program, the reality is that many families are too afraid to sign up for the program. What that means is that not only do their kids not receive free and reduced lunch, but also it means that they're not able to get the hotspots that we provide, because we're only providing them to students who qualify for free and reduced lunch, because that's the way that the funding was set up. And then those families are also not able to access any kind of special deals through the providers, because again, they haven't signed up for the free and reduced lunch program. So there's kind of a real catch-22 in there for those families. In terms of how COVID has impacted the ability of our schools to reach students, one of the things that became very clear to us in our definitions of connectivity is that the federal definition, which is, can you access a website from your home, essentially, is not necessarily the same bandwidth as can 3 or more people in your home be on a synchronous learning platform at the same time. And that's a, you know, depending on where you live, in our rural areas, we know that families juggle and have to pick which kid is going to go to class, you know, on what day, because they can't all be on in synchronous learning at the same time because it's not supported. In our city, in Woodland, the cell towers that we have right now are not able to carry the load that they are currently under. Prior to COVID, this wasn't really a problem. People were working in their offices or whatever, kids were accessing in school. There wasn't the load. But now with kids, our students are gonna be in school, in synchronous learning, well, at home in synchronous learning, 6 hours a day from 8 to 3. A lot of college students, including my own, is home from their schools. My student goes to school in Los Angeles, but it's not going to open this fall. She's going to be home doing her learning online as well, synchronous learning in class. My husband is a teacher. He teaches from home because of the synchronous learning, and our cell towers just can't handle the load. And so sometimes people get thrown off, there's shadows, a lot of different things. And then finally, there's a gap, which is that the free and reduced lunch, because it's a federal program, is based off of federal income living standards, which is great if you live in Nebraska. But if you live in California, those income levels don't actually equate to what it actually costs to live in California. So we have a gap between the students who qualify for free and reduced lunch and can get the free hotspots from us and qualify for the programs from the providers, and families who feel that they can actually afford internet service. And there's this gap. And we're still struggling to figure out how to serve those students in that gap. So those are some of the challenges that we're currently facing.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. It sounds like there's still a gap despite the fact that every student has a Chromebook. I'm going to deviate very quickly because we want to have a conversation with the audience. Now it's time for an audience question. So if you in the audience live in Yolo County, and if you don't live in Yolo County, then the question's not for you, but we'll have other questions for you later. What is the maximum broadband rate you get in your home here in Yolo County? This obviously will be very anecdotal, but it'll just give us some idea of those people in Yolo County are participating. How are you doing? Okay. So I did want to go back to, so Trish, were you about to ask or say something?
Larry, thank you. I did just want to note Christine Crawford who is the head of LAFCO, who directed the Yolo Broadband Strategic Plan. She had a couple of great comments in the Q&A, which is to note that the 96% coverage countywide includes wireless service, which is very expensive. So that's another barrier. And there are a lot of people who say, well, you know, you've got internet because you have it on your phone. And we always say you can't do your homework or you do a research paper, or it's not a fair, equitable thing. You need internet access at home that is not just through wireless. And then she also noted that the affordable internet programs from ISP are only offered for wireline service, so they're not for phone service, so wireless. So those are more nuances, and also to qualify for some of the low-cost programs, the provider has to be in your area. So the providers are not all throughout Yolo County too. So thank you.
Right. So we have a limitation of providers. I believe we only have AT&T and Wave in the community here in Woodland. I believe there's Comcast in other parts of Yolo County. And I think to some of the things that Karen was saying, we may have to revisit, if we want to get some solutions, we may have to revisit our federal definitions of what is adequate internet, right? So whether it's, you know, being able to have 3 people utilize the service simultaneously, or whether it's, you know, 25 megabit or 50 megabit is the minimum, right? So there's multiple different ways that we could change those definitions. And I think some of the conversation that we're going to have over coming weeks and months is, what do the definitions really need to look like to be reflective of what is actually useful? So Tara, I wanted to continue with you. How does Yolo County assess the availability and capability of broadband in the community? Is there a set of metrics that you use, or how do you do that?
Well, similar to the question earlier about how we read the community, it's like we base it on the data we had previously and from the Broadband Strategic Plan, and that was looking at, does the community meet the federal standards of 25 down, 3 up, right? And defining like which areas are unserved, like nothing, or underserved that have something but not significant enough. And that also is included in the CPUC map. So those are kind of the metrics of what we're looking at. But then frankly, the other thing you look at is kind of the take rate, and that's usually known only similarly by providers, but also from community members when they say whether they're subscribing or not, because that's a metric, that's a symbol give you an idea of like the affordability piece. So I think I'm going to be a broken record on this. Like our big issue is access to sufficient speeds. And I think speeds are becoming more and more significant now in our current COVID reality. And then pricing. It's access and pricing, and those are the big pieces. So I mean, I'll share this. Like we have an RFI out for a tower at our landfill to see if any providers are interested in leasing it and serving community members. And there's maps of like how many households are within 10-mile radius and 20-mile radius. But the questions we're asking is, what are you looking for in the terms of a lease? But then, what are your speeds, minimum and maximum, that you think you can sustain when you're using that? And also, like, do you have redundancy built in? Because I see in the chat and whatnot, or the Q&A, like concern about things being dropped when it rains, right? So do you have redundancy in place? And then, what do you expect the cost to be to the residents? Because I do feel like, as you know, we are serving the public in this role, and as we're managing taxpayer dollars. And so if we're providing access to a private company, they should be meeting a need of the public. And that's, if you offer amazing service, but it's, you know, it's out of the price range of folks, then it's not a good use of that public access. So.
Right, and it sounds like we need to, just like the roads or the postal service, we need to make sure that broadband internet is an infrastructure issue that is actually reaches everybody. And that's, again, part of the purpose of this conversation, is so that we can actually get to that endpoint. Mm-hmm. Sam, could you continue? Oh, I'm sorry, Tara, did you have something else to say? Okay, so Sam, could you kind of continue the line of thinking that Tara was talking about in terms of from the state perspective? How does the assembly member evaluate what is the accessibility and capability of broadband in our broader district?
So I think there's a lot there, right? And I'll kind of take off little bite-sized chunks, and the speed conversation has been really at the core of most of my boss's conversations with other members who have very different districts than what we're seeing in Yolo County. But I mean, largely that 25.3 federal minimum, we retain that minimum as the build out speed in my boss's AB 570. And we do that because we specify a preference for fiber middle mile connectivity that'll get us connectivity to our anchor institutions like our libraries and hospitals and schools that need to tap into higher speeds to really achieve the things that they're trying to do. And, you know, the difference between someone who is unserved and someone who is underserved has been this really kind of gray line that we dance around all the time, because at the end of the day, being served means a lot of what we've been talking about today, whether or not you can actually afford access to the network that's being provided in your area and whether that network actually exists. And it's hard to capture all of that in a single definition, or at least a simple enough definition that you can, you know, fit on a single piece of paper. And so when my boss has been thinking about service and who should be considered served and unserved and at what speed, really, you know, the aspiration is that we get folks to a place where, you know, they can do the telework, they can do the telehealth. We're expanding access to ag tech in communities that have needed it for far too long. And we're doing so in a thoughtful way that targets those who are really, you know, at 6.1 and below, and then moves the needle and starts saying, okay, 25.3 and below, let's expand eligibility to state dollars where we're investing in infrastructure that'll get you to not just 25.3, but beyond that, so that you can, you know, do your telework and distance learning and telehealth.
Yeah, that's really great. I think you're right that we need to expand the definitions to make the minimum level much higher minimum. One of the things that I think that we don't pay attention to is, as technology changes and as technology need changes, the numbers have to change accordingly, and they really haven't kept pace. Some of these definitions probably were made in the 1990s when 6 megabit was really fast. and considering what is needed today, just to have a simple Zoom meeting like we're having now, 6 megabit you would cut out frequently. So I think that it's great that you're looking at how do you move the minimum bar for the state. Trish, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Larry. I also wanted to note what Sam just said about the middle mile fiber is really important, because one of the things that the proposed legislation will do is provide better resources for anchor institutions. So for instance, I noticed Chancellor Houston is on the call from Woodland Community College District. We work very closely with Woodland College and partners in the community. And so if the college district has infrastructure needs, this is a way to provide capability in the critical role that the institutions play in the community. So how do we empower our anchor institutions too with resources to increase and improve their infrastructure as well? So that's a new thing in AB 570. So just wanted to note that.
Great, thanks.
Larry,
I'm sorry, go ahead, David.
yes, an additional challenge regarding the internet service made available by ISPs is that sometimes the advertised speed doesn't match the actual speed.
Sure.
There is mostly like you can get this up to this speed, but your 6.1 or your 10.1 or your 25.3 is actually perhaps just half of the speed, or 70% or 80% of the speed, depending the time of the day. In addition, if some areas are constrained by just having available slow speeds, it might get reduced for the actual delivery of the service.
Right, and it begs the question of whether we need to create minimum speed definitions. Now, I appreciate from a provider standpoint that can be difficult because you're trying to split the availability among an unknown number of participants. But I think that we need to figure out how to find a way that the providers are comfortable saying, okay, this is the guaranteed minimum speed that you're going to get. And then we need to start talking about our definitions as minimum speeds so that we can ensure that people actually have the access that they need to the information that they're utilizing.
Yeah, and that capacity available by the ISPs or telecom companies get really stressed, especially in emergency response situations. But
Right.
everyone wants to access to internet, see what's going on, or check if their family relatives are fine. That's when they reach maximum capacity. Yeah, sometimes the networks don't.
That's true for every mode of communication, whether it's, cars driving on the road, escaping the potential of a flood, or, cell towers being overutilized. But yeah, that's a good point. A note for the audience, we will be keeping track of all of your responses. And the goal is to come up with some document that comes out of this conversation that we send to you. It won't be immediate, but hopefully over the next few weeks, we'll have some kind of a summary of what we discussed today as a foundation for the next conversation. Karen, I wanted to continue with you. Can you talk a little bit more about how COVID has impacted the ability of the schools to reach students?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. So even though, well, let's see, when we shut down, of course, we didn't expect to shut down. And it was sort of an emergency kind of thing. It happened on Friday the 13th, March 13th, kind of an anonymous date. Because our K-3 students aren't allowed to take their Chromebooks home, we don't let them take them home until 4th grade. We had to get all of those Chromebooks into the right hands of the student, which meant mostly taking them all to the district office and having people pick them up there, or having them pick them up the school sites. In spite of the fact that sounds very chaotic, it actually worked out okay. And most people were able to get their child's Chromebook if they didn't have it already. One of the things that also came to light is that in our K-3 families, because those kids don't take their Chromebooks home, that meant that if that was their only child, they didn't have a hotspot. So then we very quickly processed more than 1,500 applications for hotspots, attached them to the Chromebooks, and they wouldn't have already been attached, right? Because K-3 students don't take their Chromebooks home. So we had to get those Chromebooks, attach the hotspots, process the applications, then get them to the students. And I know that sounds very chaotic, but it actually worked out okay. When it became obvious to us that there was a gap between the students who qualify for free and reduced lunch and families who feel like they can actually pay for internet service, we extended our Wi-Fi into the parking lots of our schools so that kids could walk up or families could drive up and access the internet. Woodland Community College also did this as well for their students. Although people were very appreciative, there are some real issues with that. If your child doesn't live within walking distance of their school, if your child is in primary grades and doesn't really walk to school by themselves because you drop them off in the morning before work, but now they're at home doing their classes, it's a very difficult situation. We also invested in a lot of teacher training. We did some in the spring, which was very rushed, but we kind of prepped our teachers the best we could. And we're providing a considerable amount in the fall before school starts. Typically, we pay teachers to come in for meetings 2 days before school starts. And this year, we're actually doing a whole week before we have those 2 days where they have a lot of meetings and stuff, just to like orient them to the school, new policies and things like that. We're doing a whole additional week for all of our teachers. So that's like roughly 550 teachers, where we're paying additional money to do some really intensive PD about distance learning. I think it's going to go really well, but again, not something we would have anticipated needing to fund a year ago.
Sure. And I would add that if you don't have an air-conditioned car and it's 100 degrees or more, sitting in the parking lot for an extended period of time to get access could also be a barrier.
Yes, and when it rains, not all of our schools have overhangs. That's going to be another issue. I just don't know how students will be sitting outside of our schools for 6 hours a day, 5 days a week, doing their synchronous learning. That's a real challenge for us. We're looking at, we have teachers who live in our rural areas too. And for those teachers, they had to come in to our schools, into their classroom, so that they could teach effectively, because their internet in wherever they live in their rural community is not enough to support online distance learning in a synchronous format. We have just a handful of teachers like that, but that is still an issue. And then we also have times where the internet will blip and people will lose their connection and then have to come back on. So some real challenges there that we're trying to work with.
Okay. So I have another question for the audience. This one is for everybody, regardless of where you are. If you know at least one person who doesn't have access to broadband internet in the county that they live in, just answer yes or no. And then if it's yes, then the county that they're in. If you don't know what county they're in, just put a question mark. So basically yes or no, and either the county they live in or a question mark. So we can kind of get a little bit broader view of what do do you have a connection to somebody with limited access to the internet?
Did we put that in the chat box or?
Yeah. Okay. So I kind of wanted to continue the conversation with Sam. We heard from Karen about how they were dealing with it at the school level, but what does the state require of broadband providers? Are there additional efforts the assembly members pursuing to ensure that broadband is available to all of the residents in our district with no exceptions?
Yes, that's a great question. So in AB 570, which is focused on the California Advanced Services Fund program that's administered by the Public Utilities Commission, we revised some of the existing statute related to incumbent providers and their eligibility to more or less challenge and those who are trying to come in and offer service. And one of the changes that we make is we allow the PUC to make a finding that an incumbent provider is not willing or able to provide service in an identified area, thereby allowing the PUC to award grant funds to someone who is willing and able to do so, which has been a real, sticking point for my boss. And while she's, very happy to be working with providers who are, kind of seeing the times that we're in and recognizing that it is the time to step up, really we can't wait any longer in hopes that they will. So that language is in our bill currently, along with various other changes to the program that open up the door for local governments and nonprofits to apply for Advanced Services Fund grants to start providing connectivity in their own communities if there is not a provider who is able to do so or willing to do so, including tribal governments who are now eligible for grants. And the bill also provides additional, or a new account is really the technical way of putting it, but a separate pot of money that can be used for building out some of this middle mile connectivity to, like Tricia had mentioned, connect our anchor institutions, provide capacity for distance learning and telehealth, and connect our tribal lands. So really my boss is, not accepting the status quo for what it is. Even in the short time that she's been in the assembly, she really has seen very little movement, especially in her district, where incumbent providers have actually followed through in their, efforts and want to actually provide service where it's needed.
Larry, if I could add to Sam's comments too, the California Broadband Council is it's kind of an interagency group in the Department of Technology that is working to support policy that looks at different avenues of funding to was mentioned before. David mentioned about the work, for instance, that we do with Caltrans, the Technology Broadband Council. That's on strategic broadband corridor. So we're working with our Council of Governments, Sacramento Area Council of Governments, to see what highway projects in the counties, including Yolo County, could be joint use to once projects that would leverage some of the federal or state funding for transportation projects. The state superintendent that's running the task force that Assemblymember Aguiar-Curry is on is looking at ways for the Department of Education to support schools. I know that the PUC is also allocated some funding, short-term kind of emergency funding to help again with technology access for students. So there are initiatives. One of the things that we've all been working on is trying to understand and support the governor's process for California Broadband for All. That's an initiative he announced at the California Economic Summit last November, was sponsored by California Forward. And so with COVID, that's been a challenge. I know that the Economic Recovery Task Force has said that broadband for all is a high priority. We haven't seen much detail on that yet, but just to know that that's something that we're working on, and a lot of the state partners are working on to see where that happens. And we've been looking at what's happening in other states too, how they're using COVID recovery money to support internet for all. Some states are making very large investments to really get people connected. Just they're experiencing the kind of things that we're talking about. And I want to go back to something that Karen mentioned as well about how in the town of Woodland, the existing physical infrastructure doesn't have the capability to meet the needs as well. So we need to be having a multiple approach to trying to deal with these issues, including we've been trying to look at new business models, cooperative structures, other kinds of ways to incentivize and accelerate physical infrastructure development, and to also make sure that we are eligible for federal funding, because we have been locked out of quite a bit of that funding, and the PUC and others are trying to work on that as well. So, but I think we need a state strategy as well as a local and county strategy, kind of all hands on board, and looking at infrastructure investments in non-traditional ways. Like if you have a water district that's building a project in their trenching, is there a way to install fiber as a joint use? So thinking, how can we think more broadly about that? And I know that the county is doing that through the strategic plan as well.
Thank you, Trish. And so kind of wanted to guide that to Tara next and follow up on sort of Sam's perspective from the county perspective, but I did want to squeeze in an audience question first. So Tara, I think this is for you. Is the right of first refusal with incumbent providers emerging as a barrier in Yolo County?
Yeah, I saw that question. I assume that's talking about the CASF funding and asking about that. To be completely honest, I'm not aware of that. Others might know more. I think our biggest challenge has been trying to get providers to go after that funding for communities that are in the area. And so I would love to see more providers leveraging, seeking that, and we could help them of, hey, here are the areas that are in need, and here are the number of households. And oftentimes we have communities where there's local champions who they'll talk to all their neighbors and find out what the take rate would be, and serving as partners. So thus far, I would say more, unless others have heard otherwise, more of our issue is finding providers willing to go after those grant funds or loans, the CSF funding.
So if we can meander over to what the county usually requires of broadband providers and those efforts that the county is undertaking to make sure that, again, broadband internet is available to all Yolo County residents without exception.
Right. So that's an interesting question. I find it interesting because when we built our highway system across the country, there was a master plan, and then you hire contractors to build it out, right? Whereas most of the way our built network has just been market-based, driven by private companies going where the market drives them. So certainly as local government, we're doing all that we can to guide. I would say there's less, certainly there are some requirements and we have the opportunity to leverage that, but more so our role is encouraging providers to serve underserved areas and asking them to offer service at affordable rates. And the way we can do that is we can say, hey, we know of this anchor institution, or hey, like I said, we have this tower that now has backhaul to it. And I know a provider was asking for years to access that tower, and previously it was unavailable due to security reasons, but now it's open. And so we're checking to see who can do that. Other times providers want to access our conduit to pull fiber to a different part of the county. And that's frankly a huge asset we have when we have that available. And there's a negotiation that takes place. Sometimes you need to throw in some extra fiber for us while you're at it, or, hey, we have this connectivity gap for redundancy. We need you to help with this. And so sometimes there are partnership opportunities and then other needs, but again, like just drilling it in, we're seeking to serve those that are unserved and do it at an affordable rate. That's our main angle. And I was going to say something in response to someone else talking earlier, and I lost it, and I apologize. I'll try to pick it up later.
I'm sure we'll come back to you for it. So I have another question for the audience. Again, you can put the response in the chat, and this is no matter where you live. Just let us know if you're spending less than $25 a month, more than $50 a month, or $25 to $50 a month for your broadband internet. So you can just put less than 25, greater than 50, or 25 to 50 in the chat. Okay, David, I kind of wanted to come back to you and talk about the coalition efforts again. Can you tell us what progress the various regional coalitions have had since they were created, or maybe just in the last year, if that's easier?
Sure, Larry.
Okay.
The Connected Capital Area Broadband Consortium, led by Valley Vision, has been very active in the last few years, and Trish, Isa, and the Valley Vision team has really good results to report, including in the last year, assisting 3 CSF infrastructure applications submitted to the CPUC for this past 2020 application cycle. The consortium has been writing and releasing the Sacramento Region Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy, has prepared the strategic broadband corridors, as Trish mentioned, reported the report, which the Sacramento Area Council of Government included in plans for joint use DIG-1s for transportation projects, and with SACO completed the inventory of strategic broadband corridors and conduit opportunities with 31 projects identified. Also, the consortium has identified best practices for permitting, zoning, and streamlining for all types of infrastructure, including 5G, have been promoting CPUC tools to validate coverage and speeds, including the CalSpeed app, and have also been participating in the American Broadband Initiative Federal Funding Workstream Mapping Subgroup, and has ongoing collaboration with CPUC, NTIA, and FCC, including in the new RDOF program. And the Sacramento Coalition for Digital Inclusion has also generated and published a preliminary report with recommendations to increase digital inclusion in Sacramento County and inform the development of the comprehensive plan. The coalition has also created a map that shows where households own computers and subscribe to broadband. The preliminary report shows some versions of that map. And that's kind of a summary of the consortium and the coalition.
Great, thank you, David. So we had a question come in that I'm just going to throw out to whoever has the answer. Is anyone hearing complaints about providers throttling bandwidth in order to sell service upgrades?
We do hear that occasionally from time to time, or especially for some of the residents who are on the low-cost programs. The speeds are not as high either, so sometimes it's not throttling, but you just get lower speeds. And I think under the COVID plans, the speeds are supposed to be higher for all the access issues, but the question is, are the speeds going to stay up or do they drop? And then just one thing that David had mentioned before too, a lot of times the reported speeds are not the same as the actual speeds, and that's why the speed testing is really important.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you, Trish. Okay. So I want to kind of talk about the barriers, and we're starting to get close to the end of our time. So if you can kind of put just sort of a list of the things that you see as barriers to ensuring access to reliable high-speed internet service, and David, we'll start with you.
Okay. Well, we have a limited number of providers, especially in rural areas, which results in lack of competition. In some cases, the ISPs are hard to connect or are not very responsive. There are issues regarding funding eligibility for state or federal programs, including not clearly defined eligible areas, or incumbent contesting eligibility, and also some issues regarding the definitions of which areas are eligible for rural areas, especially for the USDA programs. And in some cases, eligible areas are scattered, making kind of more challenging for grant applicants to come out with a potential broadband deployment project.
Okay, and I'm going to sort of extrapolate from several of the things you said, and I think that we have definitions that actually harm our capability of expanding access because our definitions are too old. Tara, did you want to add your thoughts on the barriers?
I think we really need to just rethink our model on how we do this, because the traditional financing model just does not work. As an example I gave earlier, there was a household or a community of about 30 to 40 households, half-mile away from City of Davis, and half-mile on the other side, there was fiber going up the road. And we talked to that provider, and because the community members talked to them saying, please, please, we need better speeds. And they went out twice to that community and they said, we can't make it work. And then we went through all kinds of scenarios because they didn't have any governance structure, right? So they can't do a self-assessment to help pay for it. There's another community that does have a self-assessment ability, but they worked with a provider who was very innovative and said, hey, look, I will build that infrastructure for you. You pay for it. I'll give you an interest-free loan for the early adopters. And they all just did a private transaction with that provider in the middle of providing it. So that's a very creative solution. It's the first time it's been attempted. We hope it works out, but we just have to look at things differently. There's been conversations about co-ops and looked at that in the past. And we've talked about this for a long time, because look at how we spread electricity to our rural areas. And a lot of that happened through co-ops. There's only 2 electric co-ops in the state, I think. And I know, or maybe it's just 2 broadband. One of the electric co-ops in the rural areas did convert to doing broadband, but to start from scratch, it's tough. We've looked at different models, such as like water districts and how they're organized and are there different ways. But we've talked about PACE funding, that's done for energy efficiency and how you can tie an assessment to the property. We've looked at really creative things, but it just, we need a lot of partners and just look at this differently. I know the City of Davis looked at, could they do municipal broadband? And the short answer after years of study was, it's very expensive in California for governments to build that type of infrastructure. It's part of the cost of doing business here, which there are good reasons for that cost, but it's a reality of how would you fund that? And then when you have an area that has other existing providers, how do you know they're not going to drop their rates and then cut into your take rate? And now you can't make all that math work. So I think the biggest challenge is the existing model just isn't working, and we've been beating our heads against this too long. And now is the time that we need to look at things creatively and differently, and honestly, technology is changing. And so maybe the costs, that's a bright spot. Costs might be reduced and we can deploy in a different way. But even, I'll say this other community, they were trying to, and then I'll wrap up. Sorry, I'm kind of going off a little bit, but we're working on a water project, running a water pipeline to connect to them a mile away. Am I frozen?
No, you're fine.
Okay, sorry. And we said, okay, let's do a dig once dual use. And we went through all the scenarios with the engineering, and it was going to cost an absurd amount of money because you had to widen the trench. We couldn't stack it. And so by widening it, the amount of money, we said if they were to spend an additional like $600,000 as a community for empty conduit, and they realized like we can probably do this like on its own another time if we need to do it, or find another solution that's less expensive. So we just need to keep thinking creatively and differently, and hopefully technology will change so that it's more affordable, but we just we're not going to solve this problem with the existing solutions we have. So.
I think that's fair. Sam, did you want to add your thoughts? What are the biggest challenges? And I guess if you want, like Tara did, some of the suggestions you have for how we might resolve them.
Funding is a huge piece, and really, I mean, even in AB 570 that my boss is working on this year, we're extending the collection of the Advanced Services Fund surcharge until 2029, and that alone is just a drop in the bucket as far as what we really need to do to invest in infrastructure on the scale that we need to get to actually achieve ubiquitous broadband connectivity across the state. And I really think that, the conversations that my boss has been having with various stakeholders and members of the legislature have been very hopeful, and that there's this, overwhelming recognition, especially in light of COVID, that this problem isn't going away. We can't just, kick the can down the road and fingers crossed, hope for the best. And I don't think anyone's really been saying that we should do that, but without really holding some folks accountable and allowing for others to step in and, providing them with the funding that they need to actually build out, and working with our local governments to ensure that we're doing so in a way that accommodates the community's needs is really where we'd like to head and where I think we're going. So, on an uplifting note, I think the COVID crisis is truly awful, but it has brought to the forefront for so many that we need to focus our attention on leveraging federal funding, like the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, and using what state resources we do have available to really build out and do it now.
Great, thank you. Karen, kind of following up in terms of what both Tara and Sam were talking about in terms of potential challenges and solutions, what assistance do you think the district would most like help with in dealing with their broadband challenge? Or if you wanted to think about it another way in terms of what Tara was talking about, changing the model, do you have any thoughts about what a startup company might be able to offer the district that might help with some of those challenges?
Well, I'm not sure I can address startup companies, but I can talk a little bit
Just
about
an example. Yeah, you can just talk about the other part. That's
a
fine.
little bit about our challenges. And I want to be clear that prior to COVID, this was not the great challenge that it is. In terms of, we had kids at school, parents at work, and the load was not such that that people were having trouble connecting. Even for our rural students, most of them could, like if they were doing research at home, could connect to a website in the evening, and that wasn't really a problem. It's more the synchronous learning, everybody on at the same time, including a lot of parents who are working from home, that's really brought the issue to the forefront. Because what the amount of broadband that it takes to connect to a website at your house is not the same that as, you, your spouse, your 3 kids, all doing webinars or synchronous learning all at the same time. So in the city of Woodland, and there's really two different issues for Woodland Joint Unified in this. One is the folks in the city of Woodland. The other is the rural communities. And so their needs are really, really different. In the city of Woodland, the cell towers are just not able to accommodate the load right now with everybody online with synchronous learning all at the same time. I know that the county mapped out where the shadows are, and that's, turning the receptors so people could get better reception is expensive, unfortunately. And we know that adding more cell towers is very, very expensive, and for our immediate needs is really not practical. So I looked into some options, some alternatives to cell towers using microcells, which it's like a box about as big as a dishwasher. And if internet companies could put microcells in the large apartment complexes in Woodland, that would help take the load off of the cell towers and would provide better service and better speeds for everybody. But of course, the internet providers have to be willing to do that. For Woodland, and I'll speak personally to this one, we live in the older section of Woodland, pretty near to Lee Middle School. Our wiring is 70 years old because it's the telephone wiring. And when our college student came home from her college in Los Angeles, we looked into increasing our internet speeds, and our provider was not able to increase our speeds really anything more than what we already had. So we are literally stuck at 25, what is it, megabits, and we can't get any faster than that. And there is no room in the wiring to add more wires. So it's really a physical infrastructure issue. Where I live, if it rains, you could lose connectivity. You could lose it for half an hour, you could lose it for 10 minutes, you could lose it for 6 hours, which now that everybody's going to be learning from home, that's a real issue. The companies could replace their copper wire on their poles with fiber in the city of Woodland. That just takes political will and money, but it could be completed in the short term. The other issue in the city of Woodland, and really in the rural areas too, is reliability. And making sure that the internet is working and it's consistently working is a significant issue. For rural Woodland Joint Unified School District, what they have right now is satellite internet from HughesNet. And it's expensive. It doesn't allow multiple people to be online in a distance learning synchronous format. And that's a really significant issue. Really the only issue that could possibly work in that situation is probably additional cell towers. But there is some good news for Yolo County, and I want to talk a little bit about that. One is that we're blessed to be relatively flat, which means that building that physical infrastructure is not as expensive for us as it might be for a very mountainous county. So so that's a real bonus for us. Another issue that is kind of a bonus is our proximity to Sacramento. And in fact, many people in Woodland work for either the state of California or work in the state legislature. And so having that connectivity is critical for them, but could be a real asset as we try to bargain how we can get additional connectivity for everybody in our community. And again, prior to COVID, this was not the challenge that it is. You know, honestly, that 96%, for most folks, it worked pretty well. And for our rural students, they went to a friend's house or they went to a library or something like that. And it worked fine. But those options aren't available now. The libraries are closed. They can't go to a friend's house. So it's a real challenge. But really it's, you know, honestly, it's the physical infrastructure that really is the biggest need for us. The easy one to fix, which I forgot to mention, is the hotspot issue for the kids in the gap. That gap between families who qualify for free and reduced lunch and people who feel they can actually afford internet. We're looking at using some of our learning loss funds, which are from the state, to see if we can address getting those students hotspots. That's going to be at an upcoming board meeting, I think in a week or two, and we'll be discussing if we can use those funds for that use.
Right.
So thanks.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're getting close to the end of our time, so I'm going to ask the last question of the audience. We think of today's discussion as sort of the foundation for a longer conversation with you, our community, and we will get a summary out to each of you. So the plan is not to repeat what we discussed today, which will allow us in future conversations to focus on solving problems for 45 to 60 minutes. So going forward, if you were willing to participate, how often would it be useful for us to have these webinars? Would it be monthly? Would it be every other month? Would it be quarterly, twice a year, or once a year? So I leave that with the last question, and then I will allow David to close us on what can community members do if they want to participate in the various coalition conversations?
I think community members have a very important part of helping the consortium or the local governments to identify which areas are unserved. The CPUC map has really good information, but it's a first initial picture of which areas are being served or unserved. But it would be interesting to see, for example, if all the students or the families from the school district download and run the speed test to see if actually all those scattered and served census blocks turn it out to be larger number of census blocks that can become more attractive for ISPs to put together an application for CPUC funding. I think it will be interesting to see kind of a countywide or in different regions, people downloading and testing the internet service speed, but for the residential service. I think in the past, the county has run a really successful campaign to download the speed test, and that is registered in the California Interactive Broadband Map, but for the mobile service. It would be interesting to see the same results for residential service, and that might help to open more eligible areas.
Sorry about that. Somehow got muted. Anyway, thank you all for your participation, panelists and audience members. We'll stay on the line for a few minutes to ensure that anybody who wants to respond to the question in the chat gets a chance to get that in there. And if anyone has any final questions, you can put them in the Q&A if there's anything that we didn't answer already. I believe that we addressed all the questions that were answered. So if we missed your question, please enter it again, and we'll hang on for the next 5 or 10 minutes. Thank you all.
Everyone, it's Isa. Emma and I will keep this window open, as Larry says, for the next few minutes, just to make sure we capture, everything on the Q&A and any responses to Larry's last questions. But to our panelists, thank you so much for joining us, and feel free to go ahead and end the call on your end. We'll keep it open on our end. Thanks again, everyone, for your time, and we'll speak to you all soon.
Thanks, Isa.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, everyone. I'm seeing a few more attendees still here on the webinar. Just letting everyone know that we'll be closing this out in a couple of minutes. So if you have any last minute either answers to the questions Larry posed or questions, feel free to type them in. I've also just now entered my email address in the chat box. So if there's anything additional you'd like to send, you can also send that directly to me and I'll make sure we include it.
All right, thanks, Isa. So I'm gonna
Thank you, Larry.
off, and I'll assume that anything that comes in that you'll share with me later.
Yes, we'll do. Thanks, Larry. Speak to you
Thanks so
soon.
much.
Okay, Emma, I think we can call it.